Hello again. So the madness of the holiday season is over. I hope you guys had a good Christmas and New Year's. The new year has now begun. So we are going to look back at the 2019 year and look at the events that have affected it. 2019, wow, what a year. So the markets have done well. As I had stated before, there was no reason for it to not continue to just keep moving upward. And that's what we saw all of 2019. We saw record highs. We saw the markets continuing to just make really good gains. Part of that reason is because the Federal Reserve has been silently adding more money into the US economy. So there is a massive amount of liquidity flowing through the US right now. And so if you guys remember from my previous video, I told you that while the stock market keeps going up, it's because it's being supported by money that was injected from the Federal Reserve during quantitative easing 1, 2, and 3. But on top of that, now the Federal Reserve has been continuing to add money into it above beyond that 4.5 trillion. And so we are seeing the effects of that take place in the stock market. So the Federal Reserve definitely has made some big impacts on that. The other impact that they've made on the stock market was the fact that they reduced the rate 3 times this year. It was anticipated, at least I was anticipating, that the rate movements would have been upward. But since for the first time since 2015, they actually decreased the rate, and they decreased it 3 times. It was during the latter part of their meetings for the year. So the first rate movement came in August, and as normal, they reduced it by 0.25% each meeting for those 3 rate movements. So now the range of the federal funds rate is between 1.5 and 1.75. What does that mean? Well, that continues to, again, add liquidity into the banking sector, which helps to move money around, helps to move that capital around, and the stock market definitely responded positively to that, as would be anticipated. And then we saw the housing market cool down, but not mortgages. So what do I mean by this? What I mean is that the sale of homes was decreasing in major metropolitan areas, but the mortgage arena was still busier than ever because there was massive amount of refinancing of existing mortgages because the rates were cut back down. And so there was a huge buzz of people trying to redo their loans at a lower rate, which is understandable because why would you want to pay more interest if you don't have to? And so we saw that happening this year. And then, and again, in the major metropolitan areas, the sale of homes was declining. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't pockets within the US where housing was increasing. Definitely there's areas being flooded by New Yorkers and by Californians that are definitely going to have an increase in home sales and home values. But overall, the major metropolitan areas saw a decrease in that. And that's, again, because we saw just more people refinancing existing homes. The construction continues to do well, but it's definitely not where you would expect for all the buzz with the interest rates and mortgages. You would think there would be way more new construction of homes, but it's really not. Again, it just goes back to people refinancing their existing homes. We saw manufacturing sector continue to decline this year. Again, that's not anything new or unanticipated because we've shifted as an economy to more tech focused instead of manufacturing focused. So the tech industry continues to increase jobs, but the manufacturing sector continues to decrease jobs. And that's kind of been anticipated. That's not surprising or new. So there's that. And again, the reason that we see that kind of shift in the trend between manufacturing and the gig economy is because again, the barriers to entry into the tech sector are minimal. I mean, if you have a laptop, I can talk today. If you have a laptop and you know how to code, or you have an idea and you know somebody, or you can hire somebody that can code for you, I mean, that's it. That's all you need in order to make it big into the tech industry. Whereas manufacturing, that is a lot of overhead. That's a lot of capital you have to have up front in order to get into that. And so this is why we see the gig economy just continue to increase at an exponential level, whereas manufacturing, we see pullback on that. And then, of course, I mean, you've got different trends in the way that people want to work. People want to be able to just work from home and be in their pajamas and work on their computer, whereas having to, as opposed to getting up really early in the morning, driving to, your work and doing manual labor there. There's just a whole shift in the trend of how we want to work on top of that. So we're seeing these different dynamics play out in the US economy, and these are the ending results of those dynamics shifting. On top of that, we saw the trade dispute continue to just drag out. Again, it's not a trade war. It definitely is not a trade war. It is a trade dispute. Multiple times, China and the US walked away, and they both came back to the table, walked away, came back to the table. It's like, oh my gosh, can you guys just make up your mind and do something? And it's because both sides are trying to flex their muscle a little bit. And of course, both sides are trying to make the best deal for their countries. So naturally, you're going to have them go into the mentality of a zero-sum game, which is if, let's say China goes into the negotiations with the US with a zero-sum game mentality, they're going to say, okay, well, if we give you something, that means we lose. And the US goes into it with the same mentality of, well, if we give China something, then we lose. That's not the case. There's, again, plenty to go around. There's a big enough pie to share for everybody. We could have what's called a Pareto efficiency, which means that both sides come out better off, or neither side comes off worse off. So there's plenty to go around, but they just go into it with the wrong mentality, and then the negotiations fail. So we're still in the middle of that. There is another date set for to have a trade talk and hopefully come to an agreement, and that's going to be in the middle of January. So we'll see how that goes. Then at the end of January, it is anticipated that Brexit will happen. That's another thing that just keeps being said, but nothing's actually happening. So we'll see if that actually comes to fruition. The EU is desperate to keep the UK within its bloc, because if the UK leaves, this opens the door for other EU members to leave. The biggest problem to that is not only other members leaving, but the fact that if there's a member that's on the euro that wants to leave, then we've really got some big discussions ahead. And that will definitely make some big shifts. If a member of the euro, so there's the EU, which is about 27 countries or so that are part of the EU bloc, the European Union bloc, and they all trade with each other. They have trade agreements, they have political agreements, military agreements. I mean, they've got so many agreements with each other. They're very closely tied to one another. But within that, you have the euro, which is about 19 countries or so, if I remember correctly the last time I looked. And so they might have added some other members to that since, but it's about around 1920 members. But they are all on one currency. And so they're deeply rooted within the Union bloc, the European Union bloc. If one of those members wants to leave as a result of the UK leaving, then that's going to actually make a shift in the currency arena, because now it's going to affect the euro, which is one of the dominant currencies in the world. And so this is why you see the EU really fighting hard to keep the UK within the within the bloc. I know they constantly are like, oh, we don't care, let the UK go and da 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 da. But then what they do secretly is put up all these barriers for the UK to have to jump over before they get to leave the EU. So there's a lot of dynamics going behind the scenes on that that I don't think a lot of people are aware of, but that's what's happening there. So we'll see if the Brexit actually happens. My gosh, it's been going on for years. They've been talking about this for years, and nothing has happened yet. So we'll see if anything actually comes of it. Let's see. On top of that, okay, 2020. We are going into 2020, which is a presidential election year. This is going to be fun. Wow. Okay. So statistically, Trump will win because in the history of the US, only 5 incumbents did not ever get a second term. 5. That's it. So statistically, he's going to win it. But if you look at, and again, this is just all my opinion, take it for what it's worth, but if you look at the Democratic nominations and the way the kind of dynamics of the Democratic Party have been as of late, it almost doesn't matter who they put up against Trump, they lose. And here's why. So if you get somebody like Bernie or Warren, if they take the primary election, their primary nomination, then you get, the heavy support of the progressive base within the Democratic Party, but you will lose out on a lot of the moderates because they can't identify with those candidates and their policies. If you get somebody like Bloomberg or Biden, who tends to be more moderate, you'll capture the moderate base, but then you're going to alienate the progressive base. So either way, Trump ends up taking it. So, and working under that assumption, there's not going to be much change to what we've already been seeing. The U.S. economy will continue to move forward, not anything in particular with Trump, but it's going to be business as usual. And there won't be any big shifts or rocking the boat at that point. So in 2020, again, barring any crazy developments, we will probably continue to see the markets move upward. There's not anything that indicates that there would be a hindrance to that. I know there's been lots of talk of recession. There's been lots of talk of recession ever since the last Great Recession, but it's been a decade and we still haven't seen it. Statistically, we should have seen it, but we haven't seen it for a host of reasons, which again, one of the reasons is because the Federal Reserve has pumped in that $4.5 trillion, and now they're adding new money on top of that. So, and then of course, the indicators about the inverted yield curve have been discussed heavily, as it always is as soon as we see an invert happen. But again, people have been paying attention to it and trading on the information, which is why we're not seeing the inverted yield curve be as good of an indicator as we have seen in the past when nobody was paying attention to it. And so that remains to be seen if we're going to see the results of a recession because we saw the inverted yield curve. We've been seeing that actually for years. We have not seen the recession that's predicted yet. And the recession is, it's 2 consecutive downturns in GDP for 2 quarters. And so if we see that, then that's technically considered a recession. A downturn in the market is not considered a recession. So let's make that clear. There's always going to be fluctuations in the market, but that doesn't necessarily indicate recession. So like we saw at the end of 2018, the markets took, a nosedive right at the end, but it wasn't considered a recession. There was just a downturn in the market. So that's how they are not the same. They're not one and the same. People try to use that interchangeably. That is not correct. So, so that's what, again, we just plan to see the markets continue to move upward if the Federal Reserve continues to be this accommodating. Now, in December, they had stated that they're not, in their December meeting of 2019, they had stated that they have decided not to move the interest rates in the foreseeable future. Unless there's some sort of event that requires their accommodation, they're not planning to make any moves with that. With that being said, then the markets will and the economy will continue to just move as it has been doing so. We will see definitely oil prices spike since there have been increased tensions in the Middle East. And of course, I mean, come on, the oil industry, give them any reason to increase prices, they were going to do it. But this definitely gives them a big reason to increase prices. And so we're going to see that elevated through the winter months, which we normally wouldn't see. The oil industry has definitely kept the prices a little more steady this year during the winter months, and that's partly because there have been big winter storms that have hit the East Coast. And I've told you guys before, whenever they get hit with big storms, because all their infrastructure is designed on oil being the primary source for heating, they consume a ton of it. And of course, the oil industry loves to use that as an excuse to buoy up their price. Even though there's not really a lot of consumption nationwide as far as traveling, because people are not traveling that much during the winter months, they try to buoy it up with the fact that the East Coast is consuming a lot of oil for heating. And then in the last 2 weeks, they've been hit with 2 big major storms, and that's definitely helped to keep the prices up on oil, which is unfortunate because that just continues to increase prices for everything else for us. But that's not going to be surprising to see oil continue to push upward, and not just stay steady, but they're going to push that price upward because of the tensions have increased in the Middle East. And honestly, that's nothing new. The Middle East has always been in a state of influx as long as I can remember. My goodness. So really, we're just going to kind of see things move the way that they continue to move. Anyways, so that's it for this video. I have been kind of brainstorming and looking at other things to make videos about, just some fun, data-driven, everyday stuff. And you'd be surprised at what's available out there. And when you look at the world through not a social media lens, but through a data and economic lens, it's amazing the patterns that you see and correlations that are there. It's really quite fascinating. I know I sound like a geek because I am one, but I love all this stuff, and I just want to be able to talk about it with everybody else, and hopefully you guys get some enjoyment out of it and get some good information out of there. If you guys have any questions, as always, put them in the comment section below, and then hit that subscribe button, and I will talk with you guys later.